All right, we are ready to go, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate the turnout. We had quite a bit of interest for tonight's meeting, and we're really excited about that. So quick introduction. My name is Dannika Rynes. I am the communications manager here for Columbia Association. And again, I cannot thank you enough. I know everybody's time is valuable, and we have been on Zoom enough probably in the last, or for the 8 hours of our normal workday. So we appreciate you being on this evening. We will try to keep it to the hour and a half that we have allotted, just again to respect everyone's time. We are using Zoom webinar tonight, so if you're not familiar with that, you will be able to see the presenters on screen who are called panelists in this application. You will not be able to see yourselves or other attendees. If you're having some difficulty hearing or seeing something, please use the chat function. You can find that at the bottom of the Zoom screen, along with some of the other prompts that we'll go over. We do have the Q&A open tonight. That's another function on Zoom. And feel free to drop your questions in that box whenever you would like. We're going to have some time at the end of the session to address some questions and get some answers from our presenters. So in that vein, we will do our best to get everybody's questions answered. Keep in mind, though, that the purpose of this particular presentation, I should say, is really to talk about stream restoration efforts at large, and not a specific project or specific project details. So there are other opportunities, though, to speak more in depth about specific projects. I know a lot of you may be interested in the upcoming project in Long Reach in particular. There's a meeting on November 2nd about those details. So want to make sure you have that information that is up on CA's website. I will mention the information again, or the details later on this evening. But again, we will really be focused tonight on stream restoration in general and why CA participates in those kind of projects. Now, please note that some questions also may be similar, and for the sake of time, I'm the moderator here. I will be looking over the questions as they come in, and I may try to combine some questions to pose to the presenters in order to make sure that everybody is heard tonight. So if you feel like your question was not answered by me doing that, you can always email our team, and we can absolutely provide you with that contact information. Also, there were a number of pre-submitted questions, and we absolutely appreciate that. To ensure that everybody has a fair opportunity, though, to get their questions answered, since that wasn't a requirement for this, we will try to incorporate some of those, as well as responding to folks who do post in the Q&A tonight. So again, if you pre-submitted questions, thank you very much. We really very much appreciate that. But again, we want to make sure everybody is treated fairly in this venue. And again, if you feel like your questions were not answered, we'll be sure to get you the contact information you need. And of course, please be respectful of the panel tonight and your fellow attendees. Personal attacks will not be tolerated this evening. Really appreciate everybody just bringing their respect to this venue. So additionally, you will see some pop-up poll questions throughout this session. If you're not familiar with that, I want to go ahead and show you what that'll look like for you. So this is just, oh, excuse me, that is the wrong one. Let me try that again. See, this is new for me as well. Here's just a fun one. Do you dress up for Halloween? So you can answer that just for fun. We won't do anything with this, but that just gives you an idea of what this will look like. I'll try to keep it up for about 30 seconds or so everybody has a chance to answer. Gosh, nobody's dressing up for Halloween, goodness. These are absolutely voluntary, I should mention. So just another opportunity for you to provide feedback or input. If you don't want to answer, all you have to do is click the X on the top right-hand corner of the poll question box and just wait for it to disappear, not a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. Riveting stuff, guys, about 2/3 no costume, no costume. So getting down to an overview of what you're going to see tonight. So you'll be hearing about, again, stream restoration projects in our community. You're going to hear from CA President and CEO Lakey Boyd, Vice President of Community Operations Dennis Mattey, and Watershed Manager John McCoy. This is a topic that really sparks some interest and comments here in Columbia, both in the past and currently. Some people are really excited to see this work happening in their backyards. Others have some concerns, and we understand that. So it's important you really have as much information as possible, and that's what tonight is all about. It's also important that you hear directly from your neighbors and peers about their experiences, not just us. So that's why we asked a few individuals to participate in this session. and they were willing to do so, and we're so grateful for that. Our team went and met them out in the community where they are, so you're going to hear from them throughout this presentation as well, and we're looking forward to that. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Lakey Boyd, our president and CEO, and she's going to get us started here.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm in the process of sharing my screen. So can everyone see that? Yes, I'm getting a thumbs up from Dannika. So I'm excited to be here. I want to take a quick moment to kind of outline why we are doing this session. Dannika has hit on a few elements, but I want to be clear that so I will be in my tenure next week will be 6 months. And one of the key pieces of feedback I have gotten definitely from the community is that we have a lot of resources inside of CA that obviously you as residents, as businesses, pay for as part of the annual charge. And that is something that I think we can do a better job at getting a lot of that expertise, a lot of that experience as a resource out into the community. So what I have found is that some people that are particularly plugged in, maybe in our advisory committees or in a volunteer program, or have lived here for, a decade or multiple decades, have an idea of who to talk to, and I've got a question about this, and I know the right person to call or to email. And that is valuable information, but I also want to make sure that as we move forward, that is clear across CA. So we're working on everything from, where is our front door and how do you get in the front door to then figure out where you need to go. But one of the key pieces, and Dannika hit on a moment ago, is making sure that we're getting the information inside CA out, and that we're also getting out into the community. So, this continues to be a virtual format as the best, most prudent choice from a public health perspective. I think in a lot of ways it can make it more accessible for people that, can't go out on a Tuesday evening, to a certain room at a certain time at a certain place. We're also going to be recording it because this is the kind of information that we want people to either be able to go back to, or if they couldn't tune in tonight, still get the information. So I just wanted to be clear that the education sessions themselves are something that we are going to continue to do. I have a few ideas on topics based on working across our departments and based on community feedback. But if you have specific ideas outside of this topic of stream restoration, please feel free to reach out. You can put it in the chat. It's something that you can email me, you can email Dannika, but it is a process that we're kind of at the beginning of. So this is a good structure that we're going to be using, kind of an overview, from my role of why we do certain work, then digging in a little bit more, in this case at the vice president level, to kind of talk about all the components of the work, and then to really have our technical expert that we have on staff that adds so much value to CA to really dig into details. And Dannika hit on one other piece that I want to echo, which is the whole idea of this education session is not to be project specific. And the reason for that is that people having a better understanding of the why and the how and the what, and kind of the full picture before it is a direct project, in my experience in community work, is a better way for people to really get an understanding. So while I'm sure many, directly adjacent neighbors are participating, this is definitely a session that is meant to be informative to anybody in the community that wants to better understand Watershed, wants to better understand sustainability, climate change, kind of those pieces of the puzzle. So I wanted to just kind of make sure to share the bigger picture that we're at the start of a new kind of component process for CA. And then just let's dig in. I think the big question that we're getting, assuming I can actually, there we go. that we get a lot is why. And we get that a lot across a lot of topics. So in particular, why does CA deal in stream restoration? And I think it's pretty straightforward. It is in direct alignment with our priorities and our values. So what is here on the slide is CA's mission and vision. And you can see that, you know, sense of place, quality of life are key components, and the evolving needs. The last bullet that says BOD strategic priorities, so that's board of directors. One of the strategic priorities that was adopted in a 2019 strategic plan by the board of directors, and that was before my time, but I understood it as an interactive process. There were some senior staff involved. And the goal of these, the roughly 5-year plans, is really to set the course of, you know, what are our priorities? What do we really want to focus on the next 5 years? So I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that environmental sustainability is a key goal in the Board of Directors strategic plan. And really the idea of Columbia as a community and CA as an organization being a leader in environmental sustainability. And you can see a few of the phrases and ideas: climate change mitigation, sustainable land use practices, definitely a focus around our streams, ponds, and lakes. And then really, again, the component we're working on this evening, educating and connecting citizens to that work and to a better understanding for individual practices for sustainability and obviously organizational community level practices. So the other question is really, how does CA do this? And again, as we move through the presentation, more detail will be shared. My view is really, in my role as president and CEO, we absolutely allocate resources to this very important work that we do in a lot of different ways. So in a very straightforward way, in funding. So in our operating budget, we have ongoing funds, but we also do it through our capital budget in very specific projects. We have staff. So we have a sustainability team that includes more than just our watershed work and stream restoration work, also renewable energy. We have outreach as a component. Our advisory committees, this is another piece that the board of directors has been involved in making sure we have relevant advisory committees. So the ones in particular relevant to stream restoration or watershed, and then we also have a climate change and sustainability advisory committee. And then lastly, even in our volunteer programs, which of course are staff supported or coordinated, sometimes we provide materials. So for example, the Stream Waders program, which you'll hear about more this evening, tree plantings, kind of in a variety of ways we deal in that. But the last piece that I wanted to touch on is something that, as I have come into this role, and certainly as I have even individually interacted with residents, I think it's very important to understand the adaptations that are happening literally in a global way, and then also at Columbia Association. So we know that climate change is having an impact. I think at this point, that is undeniable scientific fact, but I think the component that's so important to understand is that there is an increased need based on climate change, an increased need that requires funding at a much faster rate, because we are really at that cumulative effect of climate change. But we're losing ground every day, and in this case, you know, erosion, we are literally losing ground every day. But that dynamic really sets up a situation that we know as CA, our budget alone, whether operating or capital, pandemic constrained or not, which we still are, cannot fund all the needs, all the environmental needs that should be addressed related to climate change. So that's a dynamic, that's a reality that we're dealing in. And I think that's very important to understand. What we have always done will not deliver the kind of resiliency that is required in the future. I think that, there's a phrase, the future isn't what it used to be. I think a lot of people said that, particularly during COVID. But I think in the case of environmental work, the future is shifting in view on a continuous basis. And it's important that we evolve, that we learn lessons, and that it's not really optional work. If we keep doing the same practices, we will not get the same results 5 years from now, 10 years from now. That kind of investment, that methodology, that process, a lot of those tools in the toolbox have changed. So quickly, in terms of CA, I just wanted to make sure to highlight that we are working to diversify the funding streams. There is a real need to leverage funding, and we have had some success in that at the state level, some foundation funding, even leveraging some federal funding. So that's something that we know we've got to figure out, how can we get a bigger pie of funding and be creative in that. We have moved, since I have been here, to have a real review of easements for a cross-functional team. So certainly the review of the easements happened, but we've put more people at the table in different departments because we've really seen the impact across multiple teams. And that all happens prior to going to the board for review and approval, because again, the board makes that decision. We've also been a lot tighter on the terms around those easements. So another acronym, MOU, so that's Memorandum of Understanding. But it's just a method to say, if you're going to have an easement, we're going to have very specific guidelines on how it's executed, how you access it, when it happens, what else you're going to be doing with it. There are a lot of different types of easements, so whether it's access or whether it's construction. So that's something that we have really focused on as we're moving new potential projects forward. And then lastly, even what we're getting from the consultants, from the contractors, we really are pushing for more outreach. We're getting more information about Columbia, about our watersheds, about our streams, fish fin studies and different types of assessments that are happening. So we then have more information that we can share with residents. And that's really something that we see as an important part of our role in Columbia. So that is my portion, is really just to make sure to set the tone of why this matters to CA, what we see our role as, and then dig into further detail kind of as we move forward. I will remain in the meeting for the end, as Dannika said, but again, thank you for your time this evening. And I think I'm turning it back to Dannika before we go to Dennis, so thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lakey, and thank you to everyone who's about to see that poll question pop up. I'm going to go ahead and work on my end to share my screen again so we can listen in on the video.
Hi, my name is Deborah Westner, and I am the current chair of the Columbia Association Watershed Advisory Committee. Our committee is composed of people from each of our different villages and one at-large representative. This is an opportunity for all Columbia citizens to be involved if they're interested in the environment. Most of them not necessarily degreed in their profession. However, many of them are watershed stewards, master gardeners, or master naturalists, and they all exhibit an interest in helping Columbia stay environmentally sensitive and sustainable for the future. One of the key functions of the Watershed Advisory Committee is to take a look at the projects that are going to go to the Columbia Association Board and determine which of those projects is more or most important so that we assure that budget is spent properly in the next fiscal year. Once we have all of the projects identified, we try to prioritize those that will go on a list to the board, and the board then makes a decision on which projects they can afford to fund for the next year. We hope that you will take an opportunity to join us, come to any of our meetings, and let us know what it is you think are important things for the watershed.
A big thanks to Deborah there. Let me make sure that we don't hear another video pop up while I also introduce Dennis Mattey. He is the Vice President of Community Operations, and I am going to send it over to him. Thank you for everybody for participating in the poll as well.
And I'm going to share my screen. Dannika, I am having a little trouble here.
Dennis, it looks like you are sharing a whole screen, and you can probably choose the presentation itself in the share screen option. If not, I've got the backup ready.
Okay, go ahead and why don't you go ahead and post the backup.
You bet.
So what I'm going to do is take a broader look at CA sustainability program. Before John McCoy drills down into stream restoration, I'm going to take a look into the broader sustainability effort in the Columbia Association in the Greater Columbia community. Next.
Give me 1 second here.
Thank you. So if I could just talk in some general terms, and the purpose of this is to advance Columbia as a leader in environmental sustainability, both within the organization and within the Greater Columbia community. And the reason that's important is Columbia owns about 3,600 acres in Columbia, which sounds like a lot, but that's less than 2% of the total land mass in Columbia. So we're not going to be effective at promoting our sustainability goals unless we can move out into the Greater Columbia community. And you know, if people ask what is important, and the fact is that everything that we do is important. You know, everything that we do in the Columbia Association, we look at, for instance, when we buy waste bags for the mid stations for dogs, they're biodegradable. And certainly we don't want those littering the open space, but if 1 or 2 ends up in somebody's yard, then they are biodegradable. As another example, in the tot lot program, we use a citrus-based herbicide in tot lots, and that's a little more expensive and a little harder to use, but it's part of the overall sustainability effort. Next. So, you know, our best practices talking about energy conservation, about climate change awareness. We want to activate the full Columbia community, waste management and recycling. If you look at the picture on your right, part of our energy conservation is that my lights go out automatically if I don't. So I got to move a little bit more. But on the right, that is a recycling air conditioner and dehumidification program that we partnered with BG&E. And on that day in September, we picked up something over 200 window air conditioners to be recycled. Land use practices, that means that can we wait a day or 2 to mow, or can we do some meadow grasses and then mow those 2 or 3 times a summer instead of every 10 days or every 14 days. So everything we do, every decision that we make, we think about whether or not that's sustainable and how that affects climate change. Next. In terms of energy management, Lakey talked about looking for outside funding, and we've done 20 or 25 indoor LED retrofits, and those were partially funded by BG&E. We also did 20 or 25 parking lots that were funded by BG&E. And why that's also important is not just that the LEDs are about 80% more efficient, it's the life cycle cost of that. The metal halide bulbs that were in there had to be changed out every 2 or 3 years. The LED bulbs are good for 10 years. You can imagine how what it takes to get a lift truck out there and up in the sky. In terms of HVAC equipment, we have over 100 HVAC units throughout Columbia. Most of them are Energy Star rated. The larger ones don't fit into that category, but we are starting to move away from natural gas, and we're going with something called a dual fuel heat pump. And of course, heat pump comes from renewable sources. It's electric, and natural gas is part of the greenhouse gas emissions problem. So we are moving away from that. It's a little more money on the front end, but long term, it's going to be less expensive, especially as natural gas gets increasingly more expensive. We have 10 solar PVC stations on city facilities. We have 8 EV charging stations. We hold quarterly community meetings. We have won, CA has won multiple Department of Energy awards. Jeremy and his crew have done an incredible job. The awards are not just for reducing energy consumption by 20%, which we did win an award for, but they're also for our community outreach, where we talk about solar, and we also talk about the BGE home retrofit program. Again, we are not going to be successful unless we do community outreach. We've also reduced greenhouse gas emissions by greater than 50%. The Watershed's part of that as well. We initiated the Watershed program, or the residential rain garden program, which is a big plus. We've installed 432. That's a lot, but there are thousands more left to be installed, and we're going to continue to work through that program. We've done 8 stream restoration projects. We've done 23 bioretention facilities, and where that's important. So builders often tout these bioretention facilities, how great they are, but most of them are mandated by the permits that they receive. The bioretention facilities that we installed are part of just improving the stormwater management in the CA open space. They're not mandated by the county, by the state. They're just part of our overall sustainability program. We also have regular stream waders and weed warriors community volunteer events, and that's part of the community outreach. We are just not going to be successful unless we reach out to the greater Columbia community. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dannika. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Just like before, I'm going to pop up another question while I get set up here. Bear with me. I'm actually going to give you 2. Here's the first one. We'll keep that up for about 30 seconds here. While I pull up the next video. I told you 30 seconds, I'm gonna stick to it. And there it is. Thank you all. And Dennis just mentioned volunteers. We're gonna hear from a couple of them right now.
Hey, hello everybody. I'm Mike Calvert, and I'm a watershed steward, a stream wader, and a Columbia resident. I've been a watershed steward for 10 years, a stream wader for just about as long, and I was trained by the Department of Natural Resources. In 2019, when we visited this stream, there was practically no life in it at all. It was a deep, deep cut gutter, really, that was where the sides were scrubbed away by rainstorms and the heavy water flow that would come in after those storms. This now has a floodplain in a general area where it looks absolutely beautiful.
When we were here in the spring, it was right after they finished the stream restoration. So no greenery was here yet. There was all the netting. A lot of the seed hadn't started growing yet. We actually came in and worked with some Boy Scout troops to do a lot of live staking, which is just hammering these little branches, live branches, into the side of the stream so they'll grow up. It is shocking to come back and see green and life.
All right. And of course, we want to thank those awesome volunteers and all of you, there are some of you in the crowd as well, for making this community so great through your volunteer work. I'm actually going to pop up one more question as we turn it over to John McCoy and he gets his presentation ready to go. So John, if you want to make sure you've got your presentation good. Again, John McCoy is our watershed manager here at CA. John, let's give everybody about 10 more seconds to answer this question, because we love volunteers. So now we know where to call when we need some more. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Go ahead, John.
And the screen's showing fine, I assume. So thank you, Dannika, and thank you all for coming. I want to take some time and talk about stream restoration in the context of the Columbia Association's comprehensive approach to managing our streams, lakes, and ponds. And we do own 30 miles of streams, 3 major lakes, at least major for the East Coast, a medium-sized lake, Jackson Pond, and about 40 smaller ponds. So most of Columbia was built prior to 1985. Stormwater management was focused on conveying stormwater away from homes, streets, buildings, anything, and it's discharged to the nearest water body. And the result of this was there was very little treatment for either volume or water quality. And in open space, which has a tendency to be the stream valleys, the wooded buffers are generally bypassed because the storm drains actually run through them underground and discharge directly to our streams, ponds, and lakes, excuse me. Or, as in some cases, our storm drains discharge on steep slopes and have created significant erosion problems. So what I've got here is I've got 2 examples of storm drains that are discharging on steep slopes. On the left is a storm drain in Hickory Ridge. Now, this is a photograph from back in 2010. And that storm drain coming off the cul-de-sac discharged. It had cut a ravine that was probably 10 feet deep and probably 100 feet long. On the right is a gully created by a parking lot storm drain. And that is over in King Charles HOA. And that drains into the stream feeding Jackson Pond. And what I point out to you, I hope you can see my cursor, is the roots of this tree actually stretch across that gully. The ravine is right here, the roots stretch over it, and it has undercut this tree. So I know one of the big questions is always tree removal in any sort of land management activity. And when we have situations like this, we're not able to save those trees. So all the impervious surface that was created as Columbia was built has increased the volume of runoff into our streams, and it has accelerated bank erosion along our streams. 2 more examples. On the left-hand side is a 10-foot straight cut bank in back behind this man's residence, which you can see up here at the top of the hill. This is over in Swansfield in the village of Harper's Choice. And on the right is stream erosion along the stream that feeds Jackson Pond in Phelpsluck, village of Long Reach. And again, we have an example of a tree that is severely undercut and at some point will fall down and take a significant amount of that bank with it. And you can see how close this is to the resident's home. So all of this bank erosion, whether it's above Wild Lake, whether it's above Kittamaqundi or Lake Elkhorn, the sediment ends up in our lakes. And it is a tremendous amount of work to remove that sediment at a tremendous amount of cost, and it's not a sustainable practice. This is a photograph of the hydraulic dredging that was done at Lake Elkhorn back in 2013, where some 60,000 yards of sediment were removed from the lake and shipped out of the county. And I like to use an analogy of tractor trailers lined up, and 60,000 yards would basically be an 8-mile line of tractor trailers, bumper to bumper, hauling that sediment away. So what CA did, and to be honest with you, this was before I came on board. I was hired in 2010 as a result of the adoption of our watershed management plan. But while CA was planning this large-scale dredging effort, they understood that to solve this problem, we were going to have to work up in the watershed to reduce the amount of sediment that was moving down into our ponds and lakes. And they adopted a watershed plan, or accepted a watershed plan, in 2009 that called for both residential and capital projects to reduce the volume of stormwater runoff. And it is that accelerated erosion is caused by this enhanced volume of stormwater runoff generated by the development of our town. So our projects listed in the plan were rain gardens, tree plantings, the building of bioretention facilities, and not facilities mandated by the county or the state, as we did certain development projects, but these were voluntary bioretention facilities, and the plan called for stream restoration projects. So we were working with a full toolkit. We set up a rain garden program back in 2011. This is a state grant funded program. It is a cost share program where we use the state funds to pay for 75% of the cost of a rain garden. Resident pays for 25%, and we build this. As Dennis said, since 2011, the last 10 years, we built 432 of these, but the need is significantly greater than that. This is a cover of our brochure. The picture there is a rain garden that drains directly into the head of Wild Lake. Stormwater BMPs, particularly bioretention facilities, were called for in our management plan. And this is an example from the plan to the ground. On the left-hand side is a concept plan that was in the watershed management plan. It's for a stormwater management facility, bioretention facility below Deer Pasture Drive in the village of Owen Brown. And the picture on the right is that facility finished. We built it in 2013. Since 2010, we built 24 of these bioretention facilities, all of them voluntarily. And funding-wise, some of them were funded through CA capital funds, and some of them were CA capital funds, which we were then able to be reimbursed by from the state of Maryland. So we have kind of a mixed funding stream there. Stream restoration projects from the plan onto the ground. Now I showed you a picture of the parking lot drain that created that gully below Queen Maria Court in King Charles HOA in Long Reach. And this is the plan, the concept plan that was in the watershed management plan to address that. And on the right-hand side is the finished product, where we did actually create a couple of pools. We used large rock with quartz veneer, with quartz being the more native round creek stone. And you can see we did remove that large tree that was badly undercut. When it comes to stream restoration, Columbia Association's been involved in stream restoration projects since '04. We've completed 8. They're running from 2004 to just this spring. Some of them have been CA projects funded through capital funds. Some of that was reimbursed through the state of Maryland. Some of them have been joint county and CA projects where we have CA capital funds and the county is paying for part of it with funds. And then some of it has been state money. The SHA Ecotone project was paid for by Maryland Department of Transportation. And there have also been a number of other groups doing stream restoration projects here in Columbia. Howard Community College has done restoration projects on campus. Howard County Government has done at least 2 over at Farewell and in Oakland Mills, and over at Woodlot in Harper's Choice. And there has been at least one private corporation doing work as a requirement for some of the development they've done here in Columbia. And then future projects, there are actually 6 projects that are currently in one stage or another of planning. Howard County has 4 projects that they're doing here in Columbia. They're in various stages of planning. CA and Howard County are cooperating on a project. And then we have the project that we're working with Wetland Studies on. So there has been and is a fair amount of work being done. And you guys, you know, we've been listening to you and we've been hearing you, and you're quite correct. Stream restoration projects during the construction phase are a disturbance. Stream banks are graded down to allow storm flows to get out into the floodplain. That's really what we want. We want those storm flows out into the floodplain where some of that water can soak in, some of that sediment can settle out. Or stream beds are raised to make channels shallower again, so that those storm flows can push out into the floodplain. Grade controls are installed, and they might be rock, they could be large rock, or they could be wood, and they are installed to allow water to move down a gradient without causing erosion. When the construction is done, the sites are stabilized and planted, and the sites regrow. I think one of the important things for everybody to recognize is every one of these consulting firms that design stream restoration projects do so based on their own approach to design. So you rarely see projects done by designed by different consultants that look the same. So I'm going to show you some projects that we've done that were designed by Underwood and Associates. They came out of our watershed management plan, and I want to walk you through what these streams look like before we did this work, what the construction phase looked like, and then some pictures of the restoration as it regrew. I think it's really important. This work was done by Underwood and Associates. It is not an ecotone project. It is not a wetland studies project. And all of these projects do look different. So Bugle Drum Way. Bugle Drum Way is over in Owen Brown. The stream that we were working on emerges from a 48-inch storm drain at the base of Bugle Drum Way. And the left-hand picture is looking upstream in the original stream from about midway in the restoration area. And the right-hand picture is looking downstream. And it really was a debris-filled gully. During construction, it was a construction site. And you can see large equipment. There was clearing, and one of the unique things about Underwood and Associates design features is between these grade controls, which are the rock structures here, and these are large granite rock with a veneer of quartz, creek stone on it, and behind each one, they've excavated a fairly large pool area where their philosophy is they want water to be held as much as possible behind these weirs and to have it soak into the groundwater. So this is early in September of 2013 when this project was under construction. This is late in 2013 as grass was beginning to grow in this project. And one thing I would say about Underwood Designs, they do, as one of the last phases before they plant anything, they come in and they'll blow a veneer of mulch on all of the bare ground. So that's where you see the shift from more of an orange soil to the brown mulch. And I'll point out these 2 trees here. You can see they got these blue ribbons on them, and we can kind of track them. I tried to go back to the same spot, look upstream, and take a photo. So the progression of photographs is from a reasonably close, similar vantage point. So this is late September 2013. This would be November of 14, and you can see our trees are here and the ribbons are on them. This would be October of 2015. You can see smaller trees are beginning to come through. One of the issues we had at this site was deer browse, and that was very difficult to deal with. These are our two trees here. This was June of this year. So we're 8 years down the road on this project. We've had trees grow through the deer browse at this point, and that's about 20, 25 feet of growth. And there are sections of that project that are actually thick enough that it's difficult to walk in. The second project, this is also an Underwood design project. This is Dobbin Road, which should be right at the intersection of Dobbin Road and Oakland Mills Road. This stream runs parallel to Oakland Mills Road from Dobbin Road, and the stream emerges from the culvert that runs under Dobbin Road. This was a rough little gully. The first attempt at stabilizing this, and I'm not quite sure when it would have been, I'm thinking in the 60s, was a concrete trough, which you can see part of here, that the stream actually eroded out of and to the side of. There was a second attempt sometime during the 80s to stabilize this stream, and filter fabric and riprap were used to line the stream, and it eroded out through that. So what we did, we actually moved the stream. The stream was on the side of the property over here. We moved it out to the center of the property. As with a typical Underwood design, you have a series of weirs, and this is a steep enough slope. There's actually 25 weirs that come through here that drop that grade down by 1.5 feet every time the water comes over a weir, with a pool behind it. You can see the rock, granite, large boulders with a finer veneer of creek stone on it. And this would be January of 2018, right at the end of construction. So this is May of 2018. And you can see the mulch veneer that they've put in when they finished. You can see our large granite that holds the weirs together. You can see that the small creekstone veneer actually washed off. And this project has some caging around trees in an attempt to try to reduce the damage by the deer. So that would be May of 2018. This is June of 2019. And this is October of 2021. These are all from the same vantage point, using this weir as a stable. There's your skyline there. And we had tremendous regrowth on this one. And I think part of that was being able to shelter the trees from the deer browse. And we had a lot of volunteer growth in that project. So with that, I think what I'd like to conclude with is we are listening to what people say to us, the input we get. We are doing things differently as we move through projects. We learn, and we are requiring our contractors to do things differently as we progress through projects. And Dannika, I'm going to stop sharing and turn this back over to you.
Very good. Thank you, John. As we get ready to share one more video with you all, I did pop in a quick poll question to see if anybody or how many of you have experienced some of the projects that John just mentioned since 2004. So I'll give everybody a few more seconds to submit their answers there. as I pull up the final video and the final portion before we get into our Q&A. Thank you all.
I'm Dave Irvine, and we live in this house, which backs up on this SHA Ecotone Restoration Project, which started some time ago. We'd gone to a meeting about it and saw some diagrams, and I was trained early on as an engineer, so it made some sense to me, and I thought it does make sense. I can see why they have to do this. They've got to keep control of the stream. Fair enough. Then one day they showed up, and boy, a lot of stuff going on out here. And when they got done, I mean, my first impression was it felt like, you know, World War II had occurred out here.
Hi, and I'm Bonnie Larson. They said we've lived here for almost 40 years. I spend every morning sitting out on the deck, so I readily enjoy what I saw with the old woods. And it was, as they pointed out, painful to see those trees go down and no longer have the coverage we had between our place, our side and the other side. But I have grown to enjoy the meadow at this point. It's a different natural environment. We have a little lagoon over here, which has been visited by the green herons, and I've noticed we've had an increase in our amphibian population.
If I had somehow had a heads up on not just what was going to happen, which someone could tell me, but a heads up on how I was going to feel, which nobody could tell me, frankly, but going through it, there's a bit of a whiplash. And so if they come in behind your place, depending, if you're like me, you may go through that whiplash. From thinking, this makes sense, this has to be done, and I still think that. I never didn't think that, but what caught me a bit off guard was how much of a hit it was. And but now, I mean, you can see it's fine. It'll be getting better. So now down the line, we're better.
Thank you all for listening to that. And thanks to Dave and Bonnie. I'm not sure if they were able to make it tonight, but we appreciate everybody who shared for sharing their take with us as we met them where they were. So we're going to move into the question and answer portion. Again, we have quite a few questions posed. I'm going to try to move through them as quickly as possible. If we do not get to your question, I'll be sure to throw in the chat for everybody the contact information that you may want or need in order to get your question answered. So I'm going to start here with try to go mostly in order as much as I can. Might jump around a little bit, but John, I have a question here from James who wanted to know, how do you prevent development in one watershed from impacting another watershed with mitigation activity?
How do you prevent mitigation activity isn't designed to have a negative impact. So if you're doing development in one watershed and you are not able to mitigate for your impact to the development in that watershed, and the regulatory agencies allow you to mitigate for that in an adjacent watershed, perhaps. The mitigation work is not really designed nor intended to be a negative impact. It's supposed to be a positive impact.
Thank you for that. And John, just one quick point for everybody who just watched that video. Can you remind us what the time lapse on the closing, the drone video was? And, you know, can you put it in context of some of the things you just showed us in your presentation as well? Because I think that's important.
So we're about 9 months down the road from the construction of that section of the SHA Ecotone project. So in context, what I showed you in the end was an 8-year-old project over at Bugle Drum and a 3-year-old project at Dobbin Road. So the restoration growth is, I guess you'd call it young.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful. I love those shots, but it's good to put it in context here. So somebody anonymously, John, was wondering about the root cause of stream bank erosion. The attendee, I'll just read it, said, since the root cause of stream bank erosion is stormwater from outside of a stream valley, why not eliminate the need to do stream restoration by using non-destructive green infrastructure practices? So they're referring to things like rain gardens, bioretentions, grass swales, and other practices. But I know you mentioned some of those as well. So maybe this.
Well, we build them, and we like the comprehensive approach where you're using all of the tools available to you. But I guess I'd perhaps put that in context. We've been working on our rain garden program for 10 years. We have 15,000 single family homes in Columbia, and we built 432 rain gardens. So, you know, it's a function of people's interest in doing that. And we really have only twice had our program oversubscribed where we didn't have enough money to meet the need. And bioretention facilities, well, that's a construction. You have to build them. They take up space. In the context of a disturbance, it's just smaller than a stream restoration project. And we have residents who question the need for us to build the bioretention facilities.
So what I'm hearing here, John, too, and just to kind of rephrase what you said, there's trade-offs to all of these different solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Jill asked a really, I thought, interesting question. She was asking, many CA HOA policies cause runoff from residential yards, such as needing permission for rain barrels, permission to replace gas with native plantings, etc. She was wondering what CA is doing to address those, what she would say are restrictive, unsustainable policies that the individual villages hold. So maybe if there's any intention at this point in time to do something like that, just an opportunity to speak on that.
So that's one of the things the Watershed Advisory Committee is very active with. They have been working with the villages on village guidelines in helping the villages adapt those guidelines to allow for conservation landscaping, rain gardens. I know when we first put up the rain garden program, I went around to each village, spoke to each architectural review committee, and went through all the different pieces of what we needed to do there. And they embraced that. All of those pretty much are fast tracks. You know, as long as they're using the CA program, that went smoothly. What we're currently working with them, House Bill 322 that was enacted, which actually says that HOAs can't put restrictions on the use of conservation landscaping. The Watershed Advisory Committee has been working with each village and making suggestions to those guidelines, to the villages and their guidelines on how to make sure that they aren't in contradiction with that state law. So we've been working relatively hard at that.
Great. And connecting this back, actually, one of the pre-submitted questions, John, was from Susan, and she was kind of wondering the what can I do? You know, somebody asking what CA is doing. She asked the question, you know, are there specific grasses she can plant to prevent erosion on a nearby stream, so on and so forth? Would you mind sharing your thoughts on that?
Well, so what I like is some of our programs, because, you know, we're a little concerned about just saying, yeah, go plant things by the stream, because it's CA property. We're a little concerned about what might get planted there, how that might get done. What we do is train folks as weed warriors. And as weed warriors, there are functions where there are pull-in plants. We'll go in and remove invasive plants, which we have a plethora of, and we will replant natives, and we help residents through that program in selection. And I would say that not just CA, but University of Maryland Extension with Master Gardeners. The county has a stream relief program, I believe what it's called, where they'll actually give away trees, native trees, to residents. So there are a number of programs that we can help directly or facilitate connecting residents to, that would help with that activity.
That's great. We had kind of a more taking Columbia and our community and putting it in the context of the greater Chesapeake watershed. So Mike was wondering, to what extent, if any, is erosion control here in Columbia used to offset the greater erosion elsewhere in the Chesapeake watershed?
Offset in a formal regulatory standpoint, it's not really. Mm-hmm. We the only organization that we allow to take credit for what we do is Howard County government. So it's really not offsetting anything going on elsewhere. We certainly have significant enough issues here that we're going to focus on addressing them.
Fair enough. I'm going to give you a quick break, John, because Dave was asking me in particular, and you can absolutely chime in, what the communications plan is to avoid a Dave and Bonnie shock experience. And I love that question because we just really appreciated both Dave and Bonnie's honesty in that video. And I think a lot of folks felt that way during that last project. And I will say it really starts with events like this one, Dave. So I can't say enough how much we appreciate everybody coming out tonight, because I think the more, personally, the more we can have John talk us through the technical details of these projects and why we do it, as well as give a sense of down the line, for years to come, what this may look like for your community if you're experiencing one of these. Hopefully, that will lessen the quote unquote shock experience that you're referring to, and quite frankly, being transparent about what it will look like when the work itself is going on. So, Lakey, is there something else you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I wanted to just quickly say that I think that's part of the impetus of tonight's session, as Dannika was saying, but I would add that frankly, it's why we decided to include so much imagery in this presentation. It was part of our strategy. Getting that feedback and doing some of the drone footage, doing the time lapse. To be honest, these are multi-generational projects. I'm coming in at a time that, we're just over 50 years old. And we're at a pivot point, even outside of the pandemic, of what are we doing for the next 50 years? What investments do we have to make that we learned? John started his presentation with how development happened. What was good
development methodology, you know, in the late 60s and early 70s is very different than even what is allowed by regulation and law today. So I think we're trying to be as transparent as we can in sharing people's experience and sharing the imagery of it. And then frankly, it's really what we're looking at on this next project and what John has already talked about what we're expecting, the kind of interaction, the level of interaction that is going to be happening on future projects. And that is all well ahead of any dirt turning, anything moving. You know, we can be a year, 2 years out. And so I think that getting people, you know, interested and educated at this point to shape the project, because what often happens is we do all the notices, there's a lot of legal requirements, and nobody really pays attention until a construction vehicle shows up. And that's not a Columbia experience, that's my experience from a lot of different communities. So I think what CA can do a better job of, and tonight is an example, is making sure you understand the process, where you engage, where you can have an impact, and really understand kind of the arc of how it happens. And John McCoy is a resource we have in-house because this is such important work. And his knowledge, his background, his experience, you know, in state government doing these projects is something that adds value to you as a CA resident. And we want to make sure that you understand that and know how to leverage that resource.
And if I might take the opportunity to pitch next week, we have a in-person meeting, which we've been asked to convert to both an in-person and virtual, and we are busily working on that, and that will be with Wetland Studies and Solutions, and that will be an opportunity to specifically address what I believe most people are really kind of focused on, which is the Long Reach project, and to talk with the designer before the project has been designed. This project isn't designed. And so what we'll do on Tuesday is there will be a number of folks from Wetland Studies and Solutions. I'll be there, and we're going to spend a long time working through, because you know, I read the questions. A lot of them were real specific, you know, where the landing area is going to be, what kind of rock, and it's like, well, we don't know. The design hasn't started per se. Some of the background work has started, and we'll let Wetland Studies talk about that Tuesday.
Thank you, John. We'll try to bring that up at least one more time before the meeting is done here. So a couple of other questions, and I apologize, I don't know why it's not moving off you, John. The camera must just love you that much. So Martin actually sent us some pre-submitted questions, but I think he asked a good one here, asking about how CA measures the success of mitigation projects and how and when we'll inform the public. Of course, you know, that's partially on me and my department, but I'm interested to hear from you about measuring the success of these. And Michael actually added a similar question, I would think, about quantifying the reduction of sediment in the lake since we've done these stream restoration efforts. So maybe you can kind of bundle that together.
So we should differentiate between mitigation projects, which CA would be required to do. Like when we redid the Hobbs Glen Clubhouse, we had to do stormwater management for the changes we made over there. And when we built the tennis barn, we had to build bioretention facilities. Those are not mitigated, they're regulatory requirements. And the success of them is measured by the county as they inspect them on a regular basis. We also build these voluntary projects, which are not required. The success of them has a tendency to lean more towards, are we vegetating them well? Is vegetation staying well? Are they infiltrating water as they're supposed to? We don't want them holding water, things like that. but those are not quantitative measurements on our voluntary projects. And when it comes to actual mitigation type activities, again, we'll get back to the specifics of the Long Reach project on Tuesday, and we'll let Wetland Studies, because they are better suited and better versed in it than I am, explain how that project is regulated and monitored and the requirements for that.
My apologies, I'm working off of 2 screens here, trying to make sure the Q&A is going well, and of course my mouse didn't cooperate. So following up on that, John, just want to make sure this question from Michael is answered. Is there a way to quantify yet the reduction of sediment in lakes since we've done these stream restoration efforts? That's okay. I didn't realize I was asking 2 very different questions. So
well, thank you. So yes, there is actually. We measure sediment inputs to the 3 big lakes with a consultant. They do bathymetric surveys on a regular basis, both whole lake surveys and hotspots where we know we have significant amounts of sediment coming in. That's done on an annual basis, and we keep a rolling annual average of sediment input to each of the lakes. Every year we update it. So we have a management plan for sediment in the big lakes. It's currently being worked on by our consultant, Bayland Design and Consultants Incorporated, and they are lake management specialists. They do a lot of government work in Arundel County, Montgomery County, and they do great work for us.
John, as you well know, trees are a big point of maybe contention or concern during these projects, and a few people in the Q&A are asking about the impact on, trees when we do these kinds of projects. Is there, an anonymous individual asked how many trees were cut down for these, so I'm wondering if there's a rough estimate on that. But I think, and I will search, there was another question here, and I apologize. Oh, here we go. From Richard about how the removal of trees sequestered carbon and such for stream restoration, or he called customization fit, customization that is, fit in with CA's climate change policy. So I think we're talking about the trade-off here of trees coming down and the work that we're doing and how we kind of calculate those.
Well, okay, so are we talking about trees removed by any individual project or overall?
Let's start with individual projects, maybe how we really, what our role is in looking at, what trees are coming down, how many for any given project. Is there a particular process for that?
So that's actually changed over time.
Okay.
And in early planning, we would be given design sheets. They would show proposed trees to be removed, mainly around the streams. And over time, it was kind of like, okay, guys, we don't want to see just the ones that are being removed by the stream. We need to know where their haul roads are going to be, where their landing areas are going to be. We have had some projects reach C above Wild Lake, and the Longfellow project did not have pathways through the entire project area, so you didn't have a pre-existing access road. Bugle Drum was an example of that also. We did not generally count trees coming down. And we also have some trouble, I guess I would call it, the larger trees are the ones that get marked. And you know about them, 24, 30 inches in diameter at chest height. The smaller undergrowth is 2 to 4 inches in diameter, maybe 6 inches. That generally doesn't show up on planning documents, so you don't know how much of that got removed. I would say that the work we're doing over at Proudfoot in conjunction with the county, that plan, we stopped them and we said, hey, you know, we want a better inventory here. You need to mark these trees. You need to inventory their by geolocation. We need to see them on the plan, and we don't need to see them on the grading page where they're hidden with all kinds of other markup and notations. We need them on a separate page, and so we're moving towards that. I know in the center section of the SHA Ecotone project, I counted the number of trees that were set to designated to be removed in that, and then I went over and counted them in the stack that they had unfortunately made by Faulkner Ridge Circle, and it was the same number, although I'm not going to take a guess at what it was because I'll be wrong. So I can tell you there in that section, you know, yeah, I counted the number of trees. I will tell you above Hesperus and then below Little Patuxent Parkway, yeah, I didn't count trees down there, so I can't answer that question. But when you look at what's being planted back, you know, it's large numbers. And when you begin to talk about the carbon sequestration, we removed some of the engines. The trees take up a lot of carbon. We removed some of the engines that take that carbon up, but they, a fair amount of them ended up on the site and they decompose. They're going to release some carbon, but they're also creating some fairly stable organic matter, which contains a lot of carbon. And then as these new trees grow, they're soaking up a lot of carbon. So I actually don't know what the trade-off on that is. A fairly complex question.
Sure. So there's one question here, John, and I just wonder if this is an opportunity to talk about floodplains and our, you know, and where we are in Columbia in general. But an anonymous attendee asked, how did CA determine that there were floodplains on past or with the upcoming project for stream restoration? And I know there might be some confusion on this, so would you mind kind of enlightening us there?
So state that again. Floodplains.
Yeah, how did CA determine that there were floodplains on past or with the new upcoming mitigation and any stream restoration project? How do we determine that it is in fact a floodplain?
Well, the federal government, FEMA, and the state government through Wetlands and Waterways Program, those are the folks that map floodplains. We don't determine what the extent of a floodplain is. And say our paths, I venture to say the vast majority of our 100 miles of paths, well, maybe not, well, a lot of our paths are in floodplains. And all of our paths that travel along parallel to streams and close to streams are probably in a floodplain. And the stream restoration projects, because they are working in a stream and adjacent to a stream, you know, by nature are in a floodplain.
Got it, thank you. Deborah was asking whether there will be more virtual sessions like this as the Long Reach project moves closer to implementation during design to assure that residents are kept involved in the preservation of certain facets of the existing environment.
Well, okay, so I'm old school, and I would much rather be in a room with people. But I think probably next Tuesday is going to be the standard where we're going to try to do a mixed session where we're going to be in a room with people and try to provide that virtual component with that.
Wonderful. Jill was wondering if you could give a little bit more information on the impact of sediment in the watershed to wildlife.
So the impact of sediment to wildlife is most of it's in stream. It buries substrate. It buries wildlife in the stream that is unable to move through it. And when I say move through it, we have freshwater mussels in our lakes, and I know they're in the Little Patuxent River, and sediment buries them. They have a certain capacity to, push themselves up through it. They actually have a tongue that they can move themselves around with. But that's the impact. It buries habitat. It buries the fauna on the bottom of the stream, the benthos, when it does that. And by removing the spaces between the rocks and whatnot where so much stuff lives, it decreases the productivity of those streams.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jill, for that, that question. I'm trying to roll through these. I know we have a short amount of time left, so I'm trying to make sure we hit as many people as possible. Kevin was wondering if there was, first of all, he said, thank you for all of your years of service to the community. Amazing work. I'm paraphrasing here. And thanks for the stream restoration projects in Harper's Choice, above Wild Lake, and Town Center below. What is the update on the restoration of the center of the stream that feeds into Wild Lake?
So we kind of made a commitment not to address specific projects here. And what I would say is I'd love to give Beaverbrook and Wild Lake an update on that, and Kevin and I can talk through when we should schedule that.
Perfect. And I apologize for throwing that out there, knowing the rules myself. I think this is a good one maybe to kind of wrap up on here, John. So somebody anonymously put in, what projects, see, and this might speak to specific projects, so you can forego the first part if you wish, but what projects do you think have the best short and long-term benefits for watershed management? And why has stream restoration become so popular? Maybe that latter question is the one to address.
Okay, so I think they all contribute. And I believe personally that the reason stream restoration has become so popular is because finding the space to do the amount of watershed wide landscape change that would be needed to compensate for all the impervious surface is exceptionally difficult. I know, and wetland studies can talk to this a little, I hope, on Tuesday down in Reston. They did some work, I believe it was, where they looked at, well, we'll just do stormwater management instead. And the amount of land that it would take was unacceptable. People, just not prepared for that. So the thing about stream restoration is in a lot of places, it is single owners, government owners, and so you have ease of access to property, and then it is less disruptive to a community than the number of bioretention and stormwater facilities that we have to build out there to deal with it. We have, by changing our landscape, we have increased the volume of water moving through our streams, and the sediments being produced by the streams as they try to adjust to that.
So in that vein, John, I do have two other quick things to throw at you. And if we can't answer them in the entirety, I'll be sure to put some contact information again in the chat. But Joanne was wondering about bioretention projects. One's being built near us, she says, looks interesting, and I'm interested in understanding the structure. I'm sure you could talk a long time about this, John, but do you have a quick synopsis of what a bioretention project is and what it does?
Yeah, it's designed to infiltrate water, to infiltrate part of that into the groundwater, infiltrate part of it through a bioretention bed, which is a very nice friable mulch, compost, and sand mix, and collect that in a pipe system and discharge that. So you're getting some volume reduction, you're getting some filtering, and during the growing season, when we've got good vegetation in our bioretention facilities, you're getting some uptake by the plants. Yeah, I like building them. They're perhaps not as popular as I would like them to be, but yeah, they're fantastic facilities, and they're good for wildlife too.
And another tool in the toolbox, as you have put it, John.
Yeah.
Janelle was wondering how long it takes for rain gardens to be effective after they're initially installed.
Well, a rain garden is going to be effective immediately, because the way we build them, it's we dig down 2 feet. Part of that material that comes out is building the berm that allows for the ponding, and we fill back in with sand and compost, so you get a real friable material. So as soon as that bed's created, it's going to soak some water in and infiltrate that. So they work as soon as they're built. The vegetation, it's perennial vegetation. It can take a year or so to really get going, but again, it's growing and it's uptaking water as long as you're in the growing season.
Awesome. Well, in the interest of time and to spare 2 minutes, we have a couple of other things kind of to wrap up with. So I just want to make sure we're, again, respecting everyone's time. We got through a lot of ground, a lot of questions answered. Thank you all so much for submitting your questions. I'm going to go ahead and launch one more poll for you as I go over some last minute housekeeping notes here. I did put in the chat the information, the detailed information about the next meeting that John was mentioning. So that is again on November 2nd, 6 p.m. over at Stonehouse. There is an online component as well. We can update that information on our website. But if you're if you're interested in more information on the details of this upcoming project in Long Reach, that is the place to get those questions answered and understand where we're at in this process as well. You know, from my point of view, I will do my best to keep you informed from CA's perspective, and make sure that John and Dennis and Lakey all have a platform to share their expertise as well, John in particular in this field. So we just very much appreciate you all being here and asking your questions and bringing them, and being very respectful and bringing some more overarching questions as well to this forum. There will be a YouTube link with this presentation in its entirety on the CA YouTube page, so keep an eye out for that. I'll get that posted. Sometimes it takes a bit to turn a presentation of this size and make sure it can get posted, so be patient, but it will be up there if you're interested in sharing that with anybody who wasn't able to make it tonight. Again, thanks to Dennis, John, and Lakey for being here. Thank you all for being here and taking time out of your evening. And with that, I will let everybody go until next time. We appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much. Have a great night.